17th year, and I'm here to get a good word today. Nice to be here with you.
Wow, man. Layla? Or Eliko or Patricia, if you'd like to introduce yourselves.
Hey everybody, I'm Ellie Ko. I'm here with my partner Mark, who also works with students, so he wants to say hi. I am a former New York City educator. Last school was HVA in Harlem, but I now actually am in San Diego. But I received the email and I really wanted to participate today. So thanks for having us here.
Awesome. Thank you all for joining us.
Hi, my name is Patricia Del Pilar. I am an elementary school teacher in Washington Heights. I've been teaching for 13 years, and I'm really excited to be a part of this discussion.
Awesome. That's my old neighborhood.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Layla McCrae. I am a special education teacher here in the Bronx. I work with K-2. And I've been doing this for almost 16 years.
Thank you. Laila. Cool. Ron, you there? Brief introductions, Jeremiah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeremiah. You could call me Jerry. I teach in the Bronx. I'm a special educator, and I work with E3 with Lasana, not like actually work, but yeah, participate.
Indeed, one of our teacher leaders. Haywood. All of my guys coming through. You'd like to introduce yourself, please.
No problem. How's it going, everyone? My name is Haywood. I'm a business manager from the Bronx, a school in the Bronx. So pretty much it.
All right. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us again.
Yeah, man.
For free legal consultation.
Hello, Sarah. We're just briefly introducing ourselves. I don't think she's joined yet. Dr. Thomas.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Oh, Mr. Blanchard. Hi, Allison.
Hi.
Dimitri, we were briefly introducing ourselves.
Oh, hi, I'm Allison. I work in elementary schools as a coach, and most of my schools are in the Bronx.
Awesome. Good afternoon, D'Angelo. Ron, how you doing?
Hey, what's going on, Lasana? How's everything with you, man?
All right, we're just briefly introducing ourselves.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I'm Ron Freeman, an education consultant. I've been with E4E, for quite a while now. Definitely looking forward to this session coming on today.
Awesome. Sarah or Siobhan?
Hi, everyone. Siobhan Glover from Harlem, District 5. Great to be here. Excited to hear I'm multitasking in another meet with my sister's keeper. But I'm focused. I'm paying attention. Great to be here.
All right, Siobhan. Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate it.
Hey, this is Sarah, school counselor at Soundview Academy. That's District 8 middle school. And I'm excited to hear more information and just being a part of this community.
All right, thank you for coming. Chandrise. Hello.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I apologize for being minutes behind. What are we just introducing ourselves?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Hello, everyone. I'm Chandrise. I'm an organizer with Educators for Excellence, co-worker with Lasana, and interested in what Sharif has to bring us and bless us with today, especially with connecting like education and like spirituality and the soul and all of that jazz. So yeah, did I miss any other questions?
No, that's it. That's it. Great. So yeah, welcome everyone. This is presentation of the E4E New York Black Male Educators Group. And it's a part of a series that we've begun now called Closing the Gaps in Education Discourse. From just having our ears to the street as it relates to education, hearing conversations from various portions of the sector, I've come to realize that there are still streams of history and things that are not being highlighted within the American experience that will probably give us more insight into what we're witnessing and observing today. Oftentimes, if we have that knowledge of the root of things, we understand the branches a little more. So so I invited my good friend and brother, Sharif ANAEL-BEY, to come share some of his research that I know that collectively we've been involved in. He's a co-founder and member of the Moorish American Research / think tank group, Ali's Men Incorporated. And he'll tell you a little about himself. We usually have other things, but we're not going to parlay that. We want to maximize this 90 minutes that you have with us. So at this point, I'm now going to pass it over to Brother Sharif. And we would love to see your faces if at all possible. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Sharif ANAEL-BEY. First, I want to thank my colleague and comrade, Brother Lasana, for this opportunity. I'm humbled. I really am. I'm humbled to be able to present, our meager portion of the understanding, to you all, and honors first and foremost to all of you with from the professional perspective. We shape the minds that will shape the world, and so this is it's incredibly important. This work is incredibly important, and it's like I said, it's an honor to be amongst you all and to be able to present, for that reason alone. Again, my name is Sharif ANAEL-BEY. I'm a member of the research team / think tank called Ali's Men. We have, and our perspective, we have an informed perspective that's a little different from the norm. And so we're going to be presenting, or I'll be presenting a lot from that, perspective. I'm also a member of, I sit on the board of one of the largest interfaith organizations in upstate New York. And I was one of the designers for dialogues between the police department and the community, between other government agencies in the community in the upstate New York area to end racism, their dialogues to end racism. And as a result of that, we conducted a lot of study, a lot of research, so that we could have the most informed offerings that we could give towards putting together these dialogues. These dialogues are actually highly successful. We currently, the dialogues and some of the other work that we do with this interfaith organization, we are currently part of we have a $2 million line item in the city budget. We do a lot of work. So that combined with our perspective equates to today's presentation. Back in 1946, Mississippi, the then Mississippi Senator Theodore Bilbo, in Meet the Press Radio, when asked about what was called the Negro problem, Senator Bilbo said that quite brazenly, said that the Negro, or the African American, is living on a 146-year-old artificial history that prevents him from equal recognition and respect in American society. So some of those things, hopefully, we're going to bring out for your benefit and for, and also too, of course, for further discussion. We have a saying, we say, communicated to the ignorant for their instruction, communicated to the wise for your own improvement. That being said, Please accept my forgiveness early on if at the end of this presentation you have not learned anything new. I cannot presume, and I will not presume, that we're all educators here. So I will not presume that I'm going to present something that all of you don't know. So please forgive me if that's the case. Let's go ahead and get into it. All right. Everyone see the screen? Hold on. There we go. Racism decoded. All right, just about to get started. There we go. All right, Racism Decoded, unique insights for broadened perspective and increased effectiveness. So let's get right into the idea of race, or what is racism? Racism defined. What happens a lot with people in general is just like terrorism, right? The real damage is not done to those that die during terroristic acts, it's done to those that live. Right? That's the intended effect is for the living. Racism is defined as a social system that provides for manifestation of the construct of racial superiority and inferiority in all areas of society. The social environment created from the system of color code race classification. This is extremely important because of the trauma from racism. Many of us cannot, especially those the recipients, cannot distinguish the difference, clearly distinguish between the condition of racism and the access of the system, which would be racist acts. So you'll have people saying things like, well, racism is like the shark that bites you. No. Racism is the water that the shark lives in. Racism is the environment that enables the shark to do what the shark does. Racism is not the European police officer shooting the African American in the back, or extrajudicial, punishment. That's not racism. That is someone accessing the system. It's the racism is not the killing of that African American. It's the institutionalized protection of the individual that did the killing. This is important, very important to understand. Color code race classification, a social system that creates and maintains a caste stratification of society based loosely on skin complexion. It is not based on genetics, which we will look into a little bit more, but on sociology. This is important to understand. It is not based in genetics, but on sociology. In sociology, we're going to explore this. Public investment in this mythical system creates the reality that we call racism or white supremacy. Participation in the system ensures its survival and protects the components of the system. Predetermined social qualities, this is also extremely important, are assigned to the color labels. It masquerades as the norm and thus protects itself as invisible to the mainstream status quo. I'll tell you a quick story that's related to this. I have a colleague whose wife is a nurse, and in her department, she's the only African American. And so a memo came down and it referred to her as a person of color. She contacted her supervisor and said, with all due respect, I'd like to not be identified by that person of color. Well, the mayor, Lovely Warren, mayor of Rochester, is African American. So the supervisor shot back, well, Mayor Lovely Warren doesn't mind being called called a person of color. She says, well, I'm not the mayor, but please don't refer to me as such. And she goes, well, why does that offend you? She goes, okay, let me ask you a question. She asked her supervisor, if I'm a person of color, what are you? She said, oh, I'm just a person. She goes, oh, so you're the default human. And so the supervisor was like mind blown, like, oh my God, I never saw it that way. You see? Again, it masquerades as the norm and thus protects itself through invisibility. The privileged caste position is one of power, and that power is the power to define or redefine itself. Very important. We'll see in a minute. There we go. This is off of the federal government's Office of Management and Budget, Federal Directive 15, Race and Ethnic Standards for Federal Statistics and Administrative Reporting. We will see in this presentation that these standards, these present-day American standards, right, are the result of what we could call institutionalized racism. We'll see in a minute. But let's look at this. Basic definitions. Let's look at the definitions for black and white. Black, a person having origins in any of the black racial groups of Africa. We're all professional educators. We're taught in grade school that you can't use the word you're defining in your definition. So that is a non-definition. Let's look at white. A person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Very interesting. So that means our Sudanese brothers, our Egyptian brothers, our brothers from Libya and Tripoli, when they come here and they immigrate to the United States, are classified as white. Like I said earlier, this thing is loosely based on skin complexion. Now let's see what science has to say about what we just looked at. There we go. This is the American Anthropological Association's response to Federal Directive 15. It notes the absence of scientific or anthropological foundations in its formulation. Federal Directive 15 does not explain what's meant by race or origin. The guidelines noted that the racial and ethnic categories set forth in the standards should not be interpreted as primarily biological or genetic in reference. Race and ethnicity may be thought of in terms of social and cultural characteristics as well as ancestry. However, the distinctions between the concepts were not clarified. This last point is very important. Knowing the history of how these groups, like Italians, Irish, German, etc., became white is an integral part of how race and ethnicity are conceptualized in contemporary America. Remember earlier I mentioned how the dominant caste position in the system of classification retains the absolute power to define and redefine. Very important. The aggregated category of white begs scrutiny. It is important to keep in mind that the American system of categorizing groups of people on the basis of race and ethnicity developed initially by a then dominant white European descendant population and served as a means to distinguish and control of the non-white populations in various ways. Again, this was the American Anthropological Association in 1997. Further, they and UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, they made the following statement. They asserted that all human beings belong to the same species and race is not a biological reality, but a myth. Further, the American Anthropological Association states that race has been scientifically proven to not be a real natural phenomenon. More specific social categories such as ethnicity and ethnic group, some would say nationality, are more salient and scientific, or for scientific purposes, and have fewer of the negative racist connotations for which the concept of race was developed. This statement comes from the American Anthropological Association. I'd like to read it in its entirety. OMB Federal Directive 15, Census and Common Sense, treat race and ethnicity as properties of an individual, ignoring the extent to which both are defined by the individual's relation to society at large. Consider, for example, the way that racial and ethnic identities supposedly predict a range of social outcomes. The particular correlation is that by virtue of being a member of a particular racial or ethnic group, imprisonment, poor health, poverty, academic failure, etc., are more likely. Such an interpretation, while perhaps statistically robust, is structurally and substantively incomplete, because it is not the individual's association with a particular racial or ethnic group that predicts these various outcomes, but the attribution of that relationship by others that underlies these outcomes. For instance, a person is not more likely to be denied a mortgage because he or she is Black, but because another person believes that he or she is Black and ascribes particular behaviors with that racial or ethnic category. Again, forgive me if this is old hat to you all. We all know origins. This is a part of the origin. This speaks to the origin of the color code classification system of race. Johann Blumenbach, not only did he propagate color code race classification, right? He propagated what's called the degenerative hypothesis of racial origins. In other words, all original human beings were pale. And then later, other races developed due to what he called environmentally induced degeneration. Some of you may not be familiar with this individual, Arthur de Gobineau. De Gobineau was a French aristocrat and author, and he is considered the father of modern racial demography. He believed that the white race descended from Adam and Eve, like many others of his time, and that the other races did not share a common ancestry with them. That's important. Believed that the white race was superior to the other races in the creation of civilized culture. Believed that European civilization represented the most successful of the progression of ancient civilization. He posited that the European civilization flowed from Greece to Rome and Germanic to contemporary. He thought this corresponded to the ancient Indo-European culture Aryan. We already know where that went. His ideology was adopted by the Nazis. Now, here's where we get to a very interesting perspective on race. I highly recommend this paper by James Sweet, The Iberian Roots of American Racist Thought. Racism as a product of old world wartime conceits. Some of the things that we're going to cover now moving forward. African slavery in America and the myth of 1619. That's a myth, but just like when we're dealing with children or we're dealing with people that lie to us, you know, once you've uncovered a lie, now you want to know the reason. What is it you're covering up? Iberian colonization in the Americas, another very significant thing. You know, as a matter of fact, it's tied to the whole mythological origin of African slave trade in the Americas of 1619. Why? Because Spanish colonization in the Americas is something not openly talked about for very particular reasons. The religious and ideological origins of the African transatlantic slave trade. What's well known is that the slave trade was business. What's not well known is that the business evolved from. The Reconquista, this is very important. I mean, again, these are things I'm sure you all know, but what's not discussed so much is how all these things dovetail into our present day racial thought in America. Spain and Portugal, this is important. Old world Afro-Islamic worldview versus New World Euro-Christian worldview. Let's stop right there. As professional educators and especially as researchers, we understand the imperativeness of not looking at ancient days with modern eyes. So when we say old world, we're talking about a worldview, a way of looking at the world. So we have to have an idea of what that was to accurately see what it is we're dealing with. So when we say Afro-Islamic and Euro-Christian, what this will become even more clear later on in the presentation. But we're looking at an old world ideal that religious creed in medieval Europe was a part of identity politics. In fact, was a key component of identity politics. Doctrine of discovery. I'm sure you were all familiar again with doctrine of discovery, but doctrine of discovery literally was the old world. That's the word psyops. It's an acronym for psychological operations, a military term. So old world psychological operations is the foundation for new world social thought. What you have today, and what we're going to show today in this presentation, is that today's racism is just socialization of old world wartime conceits. We talked about Spain colonizing, and this is again the contextual backdrop. Spain colonizing the Americas a full 100+ years before the English. And of course, it's known, or it's known and recorded that Spain, Spain's colonization included African slaves, right? What is not well known is that many of the conquistadors themselves were African in origin. That's what's not well known. Spain was the first European power to colonize the Americas, but here's the other implication that's very important. Spain was ruled for nearly 800 years by an African diasporic political entity. Actually, let's go back to this really quick. This is important to understand. The New World worldview was born from the Old World worldview. Okay, this is important. Old World Western civilization was not just Islamically influenced, but, and when we say Islam, we're talking not necessarily the practical religion, we're talking about worldview. All right? It wasn't just Islamic, it was African and Islamic. This is very important. Tomás de Torquemada. Torquemada, Dominican friar and the first Grand Inquisitor. He was the chief enforcer of the eradication of the old world worldview. He forced the conversion of Moors. Moors were who? Africans and Jews, Sephardic. These were African people in Spain, in Europe. So he forced their conversion. This is important because remember, during this time period, religion wasn't how we see it in the West. We have in the Western world, we have accomplished the feat of secularizing religion. Religion is hobby. Not so in the old world. In the old world, religion was worldview. Okay, this is important. And we're gonna see how that plays into today's issues, in a minute. He supported the Alhambra decree that expelled Moors and Jews in 1492. Torquemada oversaw the waging of a social, political, and ideological war to unseat the old world worldview and supplant it with the new world order of Christ. That is very important. The new world order of Christ was a worldview that began through a military order out of Portugal called the Order of Christ. This is from a quote from a book, Mysteries of the Mexican Pyramids by Peter Tompkins. Designed for the detection and punishment of heretics, the Inquisition was used as a giant pork barrel for the enrichment of crown, church, and inquisitors, while cheerfully eliminating dangerous radicals. Those who had been taught medicine, geography, rhetoric, chemistry, physics, mathematics, and astronomy by Moorish philosophers in universities such as Cordoba, whose libraries had since been destroyed. As a result, no Spaniard could write, speak, or even think, and that's the important part, without taking into consideration the fires of the Holy Office as a deterrent to possible opposition in New Spain. We already saw where New Spain is, people, on the map. 34 Negroes, including 4 women, were hanged and decapitated in Mexico City. Hold on. That's very strange, right? From our thinking, from our world, our perspective. Why would 34 Negroes be hanged and decapitated in Mexico City as a deterrent to the Spanish Inquisition? Answer: number one, Africans were in the Americas in significant numbers to warrant concerns about opposition to the Inquisition. 2, these Africans were intimately connected to the social upheaval in Old World Spain. Dr. Yosef, we call him Dr. Ben for short, Dr. Ben, Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen, scholar, writer, historian, in his book, Black Man's North and East Africa. Actually, let me skip down. I'm going to skip down to the quotes at the bottom of the slide. In his book, Cultural Genocide, he says, and he speaks about in 1506, Bartolome de las Casas and Pope Julius II of the Roman Catholic Church, the latter two initiated the infamous slave trade of Africans called Moors from Spain. And in his book, The Need for a Black Bible, he states that Africans called Moors from Spain from Spain to the island of Hispaniola following the loss of their power over the Iberian Peninsula in 1485. So what do we have here? It's not just Dr. Ben, but Dr. Ivan van Sertima, Dr. Tariq Berry, a host of other researchers firmly connect the fall of the African Islamic power in Spain to the African transatlantic slave trade. So we're talking at the latest 1492 as opposed to 1619. Here we have Pope Eugene IV. Pope Eugene IV is very crucial in this whole thing because he issued the papal bull Iliesque in 1442. This papal bull is the actual origin of the African transatlantic slave trade. It authorized the order, the Military Order of Mary and Christ, or the Portuguese Military Order of Mary and Christ, to begin raids on the West African coast as a continuance, or what the document actually says, a new crusade against the Moors. So this is the real origin of the transatlantic slave trade. Later, when other Christian nations picked up on the trade, it became predominantly business. But what we're looking at here is the ideological origins. It was wartime. That's what it was. This papal bull developed the mindset that perceived the enslavement of Africans by the Portuguese and later other Europeans as a continuation of the Crusades on behalf of Christendom. One of the great references is Professor Nazir Ahmed's, which I listed at the bottom, the Atlantic slave trade. These 4 papal bulls are the foundation for what we call doctrine of discovery, what's called the doctrine of discovery. Doctrine of discovery was the official justification for the global African slave trade, age of imperialism and manifest destiny, and the social construct or caste system, which we call the color code system of race classification. These 4 papal bulls, people. Iliesque authorized a special crusade against the Moors by Portugal, promised abolition of sins for every Moor or African captured and sold into slavery, and initiated the ideology that African enslavement was a continuation of the Crusades. Dum Diversas in 1452 was a denationalization of these Africans. Romanus Pontifex in 1455. That went over, or that extended to the Christian nations' dominion over discovered territories that were formerly controlled by the old regime. And then Inter Caetera, which confirmed Romanus Pontifex. All right. Fast forward to the beginnings of our great country. 2 opposing factions of American social thought. Again, this is, We all understand. We all. This is stuff that we all, I'm sure, know. But now, with the backdrop the old world backdrop that we just provided, we can now start to draw some very, very, very interesting parallels that expand our awareness and understanding of this present racial situation. Okay. In 1793, Thomas Jefferson declared doctrine of discovery to be international law. This is how, right, one of the major ways that the ideal of doctrine of discovery is now institutionalized into American social fabric. What are we doing? Did I do that, brother?
Yes, sir, you did that. It's a good segue though too, because at this point, we were going to do it into two parts. So what we were going to do now is break out into a couple of breakout groups, and I am now typing a couple of questions into the chat, which is the first one I inadvertently released a little too quick. The second one is,
yeah, we definitely needed a mind blown break.
How is everybody so far? What do you think? Very cool.
All right. So
very cool. Very cool.
We have about 20, so we'll do about 5 groups here. So those are the questions to help guide the conversation if you need. But if you don't, then take the conversation wherever it goes, and we'll be in the breakout groups about 10 minutes before we come back, share out, and begin part 2. Hi, Sarah.
I'm sorry, my Zoom just completely froze.
Oh, okay. I was wondering why you weren't. Okay.
I see that there's a breakout room, so let me.
Yeah, room 5, yes.
But how much of our history has been suppressed, destroyed, lost? You know, we just went in deep on that. So Ava, please share all your thoughts. And Haywood.
I was saying that I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of relatives that are still alive. Some of my grandparents are still alive. And they're the ones that tell me, oh, well, your family came from here, you know, oh, your grandfather came from here and he went over here and he married this person. You know, it's like a lot of that information is so helpful now because it gives me, you know, a better understanding of who I am, that I'm not just a Black woman. I am a whole lot more than just a Black woman. But the thing is that a lot of us are not that fortunate to have that oral history given to us by our relatives. So a lot of these kids walk around not knowing who they are because no one is sharing a lot of this information.
Indeed. Thank you, Laila.
No problem.
That's why we are sharing it with educators so that they can then turn kids to students themselves and their communities. Anyone else? Quickly.
I mean, just to piggyback off what Layla was saying, we were discussing how some educators also don't know their own identity, which makes it even more difficult to teach about identity and to incorporate other identities into the classroom. So.
Indeed. All right, one more. I guess y'all ready to get back into it.
I'll go. So our group talked about the idea of how this has been the history is so long of this idea of white and Black and not just American history.
Indeed. Because again, quote unquote, white people come from somewhere and it's not white land. And Black people don't come from Black land.
About that.
All right, Sharif, it's on you, brother.
Beautiful. Real quick, I wanted to make a comment about what Laila, right? Did I say it right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. But something that, you know, what Laila said about, you know, being more than just a Black woman, right? In American society, you know, this is the new world. This is the melting pot. This is the great social experiment where out of many nations, or one nation comes from many nations. One of the things that's overlooked in that is that to qualify socially, you have to have an old world connection. And so that's one of the biggest things that has been muddied up or totally covered regarding the African American is this specific old world connection. So today we're looked at as not contributors to the American experience, but descendants of products of American commerce. You see?
All right, brother. So let's dispel that myth. Let's go.
Let's go right into it. Let's go. All right. Share my screen. There we go. All right. Where do we leave off? We left off with early American history. Early American history, how these ideas that formerly that began as military conceits. Remember, like for instance, during the Vietnam War, U.S. soldiers called the Viet Cong zipperheads, geeks, etc. When you do that, you dehumanize an individual. When you call them out their name, you dehumanize them. And when you do, the purpose of dehumanization is to make them easier to kill or to control. So these ideas from old world conflict that were religious and ideological became racial and became socialized in today's present society. Here we go. Now, this is something I think none of you knew, or maybe you might have known this. African suffrage and the United States Constitution. A part of the artificial history that Senator Bilbo spoke of is the narrative that African Americans all came here by way of slavery on slave ships. Okay. This is a quote. This is a page out of, it's page 510 out of a book called Lincoln's Philosophy of Common Sense, where the author Edward Kemp is quoting Lincoln in a speech in 1861. I'll read it in its entirety. I have said in substance that the Dred Scott decision was in part based on assumed historical facts, which were not really true. And I ought not to leave the subject without giving some reasons for saying this. I therefore give as instance or two which I think fully sustain me. Chief Justice Taney, in delivering the majority opinion of the court, insists at great length that Negroes were no part of the people who made and for whom was made the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution of the United States. On the contrary, Judge Curtis, in his dissenting opinion, shows that in 5 of the 13 states, to wit, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, and North Carolina, free Moors were voters and, in proportion to their numbers, had the same part in making the Constitution that the white people had. He shows this with so much peculiarity as to leave no doubt of its truth, and as a sort of conclusion on that point holds the following language. Here, Lincoln is quoting Justice Curtis. The Constitution was ordained and established by the people of the United States through the action in each state of those people who were qualified by its laws to act thereon in behalf of themselves and all other citizens of the state. In some of the states we have seen, Moorish persons were among those qualified by law to act on the subject. These Moorish persons were not only included in the body of the people of the United States by whom the Constitution was ordained and established, but in at least 5 of the states, they had the power to act and doubtless did act by their suffrages upon the question of its adoption. I would gamble, I'm not a gambling man, but if I were, I'd gamble my house that most of us or none of us have ever heard this. Now we're at Reconstruction. I'm sure some of you know this. Reconstruction. The South loses the Civil War. As a point of information, Congress does not call the Civil War, it calls it the rebellion, because wars happen between one nation and the other, and Congress has no power to recognize the former Confederacy as an independent nation. Very important point. Anyway, upon reabsorbing the South, the former Confederate States, back into the Union, 3 things took place. 2 of the things are talked about. One of them is not talked about so much. The 2 that are talked about is that the 14th and the 15th Amendment were ratified, and they were forced as conditions on the South to rejoin the Union. The 14th and 15th Amendment, contrary to popular belief, did not create a second type of citizenship for African Americans. That's a lie. The 14th and 15th Amendment forced the Southern states to recognize birthright citizenship of those that were formerly enslaved. That's what it did. You hear a term even today thrown around, oh, well, Black people are 14th Amendment citizens. Understand that that conceit came from European Southern Confederates who did not want to recognize your birthright citizenship, as stated in the 14th and 15th Amendment. Now, the third thing that took place that's not well known or talked about, and is the real source of present, or one of the main sources of present European racial hostility in America, is that the Confederates were punished by having their voting rights temporarily suspended. That is why you're looking at what you're looking at right on the screen now. By 1870, African Americans controlled over 60% of the Southern state legislatures. Why is this important, people? Because government is management. What does government manage? Manages the public money, your money. That's why that's important. Then 7 years later, we have the Compromise of 1877, which was an unwritten agreement among US congressmen to settle the disputed 1876 presidential election. Republican Rutherford Hayes was awarded the White House over Democrat Samuel Tilden on the condition that Hayes would remove all federal troops in the South, which were enforcing Reconstruction. So they removed the federal troops in the South, essential for the survival of Republican state governments in South Carolina, Florida, Louisiana, which effectively ended Reconstruction. Ended it. Okay? Reconstruction, it wasn't that it failed, it was overthrown. African-American Republicans and elected officials were betrayed, lost power, and became subjected to domestic terrorism to suppress Asiatic, or in this case, African-American votes. By 1905, nearly all African-American men were disenfranchised by state legislatures in every Southern state. Terms of the compromise included legislation to help industrialize the South, to restore its economy upon the loss of slaves and the war, and the right to deal with African Americans without Northern interference. You are now looking at the birth of Jim Crow. Please get this book. Stephen Budiansky's book is absolutely amazing. So what you're looking at here in the center of the slide, people, is, remember we said government is management. It manages the public money in the interest of the public. We've all heard of Black Wall Street and Rosewood, but look at all of these cities. These cities were controlled by African Americans until the dates you see next to them. What happened to these cities? Look at the New York Herald to the right. That's what happened. These cities were literally victims of organized overthrow. Every single one of them. So it was the destruction. We all know the origin of or the purpose of the KKK in organizations like the White League and the Red Shirts, right? Their purpose was to protect the white vote. So before we saw these cities overthrown, they had to crush African American political power in the South. This is something that a lot of people in general in America are not familiar with. The Southern strategy. In short, it's the reason why the Republican Party was the party for abolitionists and for the end of slavery. And now and that the Democrat Party prior to 1965 was the party for the KKK. The Southern strategy began in '63 as an effort by the Republican Party to increase political support among European voters in the South by appealing to racism against African Americans. And it was an effort to roll back the advancements made by the civil rights movement and the dismantling of Jim Crow laws in 1963, 1965, right? Republicans such as Richard Nixon and Barry Goldwater crafted strategies that contributed to the political realignment of European conservative voters in the South that had formerly supported the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. It appealed to European Southerners' racial resentments in order to gain their support. The bottom-up suburban strategy narrative of the strategy marks white flight or de facto segregation to the suburbs as a major tactic in the strategy that actually went national as opposed to being localized in the South. The perception that the Republican Party served as the vehicle of civil and retaliatory action did not bode well with African American voters. So what did they do? Went to the Republican Party. Made it difficult for the Republicans to win their support in later years. So much so that in 2005, RNC Chairman Ken Melliman apologized to the NAACP for exploiting racial polarization to win elections while ignoring the African American vote. States' rights advocates foresaw the rise of the Republican Party in the South. And so the Southern strategy became the means by which racist Europeans could co-opt the effort. Now, here's the kicker, people. This is important. We are today now witnessing a new type of Southern strategy, using the election and re-election of President Barack Obama as evidence of a post-racial era in order to deny the need of continual civil rights legislation and effect rollback of the same, which is what we're looking at right now with a number of things, while simultaneously playing on racial tensions and marking them as a racial boogeyman. The strategy, according to Thomas Edge, postulates that, quote, a nation that has the ability to elect a Black president is completely free of racism. Second, attempts to continue the remedies enacted by the Civil Rights Movement will only result in more racial demagoguery and racism against white Americans. Third, these tactics are used side by side with the veiled racism and coded language of the original Southern strategies. As you all should be able to see now, you know, the old world conceits are alive and well today. Here's further proof.
One point of clarification, brother. That was the African American community migrated from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party as a result of the Southern strategy.
In result of the Southern strategy. Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. So we all know who this guy is, Steve Bannon. All right. American media executive, political strategist, and former White House chief strategist for the Trump administration. Former executive chairman of Breitbart. Okay. In the book, The Devil's Bargain, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the White House. Follow me. This is what it stated about Steve Bannon's education. The Benedictine curriculum was traditional Western civilization presented in a context of Catholicism. Quote, we were all taught that Western civilization was saved 500 years ago in Spain when Ferdinand and Isabella defeated the Moors. The lesson was, here's where Muslims could have taken over the world. Here was the great stand where they were stopped. We were taught a world view. This is how Catholicism survived. I think that shaped all of us, but what Steve took away, I think, was a belief that you've got to be willing to identify the threat. Again, in this modern time, those old world conceits are held and are used as a basis for policymaking and strategizing by today's power brokers. Hold on just a second, everyone. Here is proof of what we're talking about. Modern representation of old world social worldview. We know who Richard Spencer is, right? White nationalist, American neo-Nazi, you know, founder, some say, of the alt-right, advocates the reconstruction of the European Union into a white racial empire. Listen close to what he says to our brother.
National Policy Institute held its annual conference in the nation's capital. Their movement is broadly referred to as alt-right, but the positions they embrace are white nationalist supremacists, and many say absolutely racist. Unlike past gatherings, this meeting was energized by the election of Donald Trump. Here is some of what took place at the conference this weekend.
Okay, I'm going to skip forward, everyone. Listen close to what he says.
One person is a woman identifies as a woman. So I'm a man. I'm a Christian. Are you a Christian? I'm a cultural Christian. Yeah. What the hell is that? Well, you know, many of us struggle with faith, but I'm part of a Christian. Hold on. You can't call yourself a cultural Christian and then say I struggle with faith. Have you professed that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior? No, I have in my life. I don't. I mean, look. Is this an exposition on me? No, it's an interview. But see, when somebody tells me they're a Christian, and I'm culturally Christian. What is culturally Christian? I grew up in a Christian background. I resonate with Christianity and so on. Okay, I'm asking again. Have you professed with your mouth that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior? I have in my life, yes. Okay, that means that you're a Christian. So how is it that with what you espouse, how do you find it to be compatible with Christian ideals? Most Christians throughout world history agreed with me that identity matters and that race is real and that they're part of an extended family. Well, it's only this tiny slice of world history, like post 1965, that everyone thinks that Christianity is incompatible with identity. Well, actually, if you look at world history, there were people who actually used Christianity to justify slavery and enslaving people who look like me. And so, why are you a Christian? Why am I a Christian? Because those people actually were false Christians. Those people.
It is extremely obvious at this point that what you're looking at between Richard Spencer, right, and the host of the show are two views of the same word. They do not have the same understanding of what a Christian is. It goes back to what I said earlier. We don't necessarily have to agree, but we definitely have to understand. We have to understand, right, that we have to understand the old world view of Christian identity and Islamic identity, right, is what preceded today's black and white. Now you understand, or you have a greater understanding as to why the members of the alt-right community, the evangelicals in the South, no matter how many sins, indiscretions Donald Trump would commit, they would call him a good Christian. Conversely, this is the same reason why those same people would call Barack Obama a Muslim, no matter how many churches he belonged to. This is extremely important to understand. Jared Taylor at the bottom of the screen. Again, in his interview, it was called Dinner with a White Supremacist. Eddie Wong interviewed him on Vice. And Eddie Wong thought he pinned him in a corner saying, hey, you talk about white people being intelligent and having a higher intelligence, but you voted for Donald Trump. Why did you do that? And he said, I voted for Donald Trump for one reason and one reason only. His policies, if implemented, will slow the dispossession of whites in America. That's what he said. That's exactly what he said. This is important. It's very important for a number of reasons. Again, the power brokers that there's a benefit to the present situation. There's a benefit. Someone benefits. They want the benefit to continue. But as Jared stated, and as what we've been witnessing in the past 10 years in America, this benefit is unsustainable. It's falling apart. It is falling apart. And here we are at the end. Wow, brother, we made it. We made it. Contributing factors to racism's unsustainability. One, obvious, changing population demographics. America is becoming more and more and more brown. Other, new emerging identity guidelines. You have gender nonconformity, you got racial nonconformity. New African-American identifiers are starting to pop up. What else do you have? This is important, people. Economic crises bred from racial inequalities. Wow. You mean racism is costing white people? Yes. Yes. Financially failing urban centers from redlining. The number one reason in every urban center for there being concentrated poverty and the ridiculous wealth gap with non-white, right, is from redlining. That's it. Bottom line. This is important because restoring justice in this respect is also a viable solution where government wins, the citizens win. Concentrated poverty, of course. This is important. GDP, or gross domestic product, adversely affected by racial wealth gap. Very important. And finally, America's fall from global leader status. So I'm going to finish with this statement, with our friend, Professor Eddie Glaude Jr. I'd like everyone to listen.
mass arrests. I think it reveals very clearly how some people believe that this country belongs to them, and they act that way, and they're treated as such. An insurrection. I saw a majority white mob with impunity sack the Capitol. I saw them walking, mulling about, threatening people in the Capitol. And I saw police being gentle, relatively gentle, I suppose, giving them space. It was a nation on edge in some ways. White mob violence is a critical feature of American history. At every moment in our history where there has been a sense in which our American form of life, white America's hold on the country, seems to be in jeopardy, there's always been this response that borders on violence, or is violent. Well, I mean, let's just compare the preparation of the police to respond to Black Lives Matter protests in the summer and how they prepared and responded to this Trump rally. What we saw was an overwhelming show of force. With Lafayette Park, we saw the deployment of resources to clear the park, tear gas, a range of things, so that Trump could get his photo op with his Bible. Is that your Bible? It's my Bible. What we saw yesterday was no basic show of force. The fact that they could make their way up the steps of the Capitol, onto the bleachers, the stage of the inauguration. They were moving about. The fact that they were able to try to replace the American flag with the Trump flag. We saw photos of Capitol Police or police officers allowing them to pass through barriers. We saw police officers taking selfies. We saw police officers helping people walk down steps. We saw that for some people, citizenship means, right, the exercise of dissent. One could protest without fear of cops or police. One could give voice to this belief that you actually possess the country, that the country is yours. That's right, we own it, we own you! There are folks who believe, right, that they have the right to protest because the country is theirs, and they believe that all the other folks should just simply be grateful and shut up. Let me be very clear. The scenes of chaos at the Capitol do not reflect a true America. He's lying. You know, I understand the aspirational claim, but he's not telling the truth. At the heart of this country is a contradiction. It's a contradiction born in this idea that we are an example of democracy achieved, and yet we held chattel slaves. We've been dealing with the failure of holding these folk to account since our founding. We coddle and cuddle white supremacists. We compromise with folk who hold these views. That's the lie that's at the heart of the American project. The contradiction that this place is the reserve for white people only, and everyone else should be thankful. So there's this ongoing American ritual where you have this kind of acting out, and then people will immediately start talking about unity and turning the page.
This moment calls for healing and reconciliation. There's never been anything we can't do when we do it together.
We're at an inflection point. We're in the middle of a reckoning. And I'm not talking about the election of John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock alone. What I'm talking about is what made that possible. Right. Everyday, ordinary people, right, seizing power for themselves and shifting the political landscape in Georgia. What we saw was the beginning of the birth of a new America. We saw the crown of a new America. So we got to be better midwives. But that happened alongside of the death throes of an old America. That was a rally around white grievance, around white resentment, around white hatreds. It was a rally about white fragility in so many ways.
We're gathered together in the heart of our nation's capital for one very, very basic and simple reason to save our democracy.
What we saw is an older America clinging to life. It's in its death throes. It knows that its days are numbered. At the end of the day, I would say, choose your side. There's no in between. There's no in between. That's what I would do.
Okay, so I want to end. First of all, thank you all. But I want to end by saying this. You know, racism, as we've seen, or as I've attempted to show, is not personalized, right? Racism is a condition. Racism is the matrix. We live in it, right? But the keys to the solution, right? While we may play in it, we have to be able to see outside of it. When you know, racism, the reality of racism, the condition is a result of us living a lie. As you know, our brother Lasana spoke, there's no white land and there's no black land. They don't exist. You see, people that classify themselves as white come from someplace. People that classify themselves as black come from someplace. You see, and black and white are the main girders or pillars. Those social labels are the main girders or pillars in the caste system operating in the open in the so-called free world. So while we identify by those, there is no safe space for discussion. Because our participation supports the condition. Thank you all very, very much for allowing me to present.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Brother Sharif, for that presentation. And one thing that the last, yeah, let's hear some takeaways. One takeaway for me that I think I want to leave y'all with, the fact that in 5 of the 13 colonies, African people voted to adopt the Constitution itself. That's what Lincoln was referring to, Judge Curtis's dissenting opinion in the Dred Scott case. That's a profound fact that never is entered any school curriculum. We didn't know that Black people helped to adopt the Constitution itself.
That I know.
Right? The slave narrative is one portion of the whole story. Any other takeaways?
Whoa.
Siobhan said her brain is on fire, but good fire. Fire burn. Indeed. So I know there's a lot of processing going on.
There's a lot.
I definitely understand that.
I definitely wanted to. Oh, I'm sorry, Lasana, go right ahead.
Please go on. Go ahead, Ron.
Okay. One of the things, and listen, Brother Sharif, I want to thank you for bringing this information to the fore, because for too long it's been in the background. It's been there, and the thing is that one of the things I've realized is that there's the power of a story, and the power of the story will actually, I'm gonna say usurp, because I'm not gonna say Trump. The power of the story will usurp fact when it's delivered in a way that people can understand and identify with it. And I think that one of the things that happens, because we can look at these facts and see that you know, they're irrefutable, they're here, they're listed, they're written. But because there hasn't been a positive or a narrative behind it, it's been able to be put in the background. And I think that's one of the things that we have to be charged with. We have to be charged with making this a story again, as people of color, and just to be, you know, going along with the presentation. You know, we are a story of we bring stories to our existence through the griot and through all of the people through the land, and like the sister mentioned earlier, my grandmother, such and such and such. That's how we operate.
Yes, sir.
And the thing is that we can weave incredibly strong stories that last the test of time. What we have here is a story that is given to us. And I mentioned in the chat a while ago that a myth built on a lie cannot stand.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that is so evident is that we're living through that myth built on a lie.
Yes.
And it's crumbling, and the fear that ensues is what we're living through.
Yes.
And I think that we need stories like this to be told so that everyone benefits, because this is not a zero-sum game. What happens here is that if people know, and this is one of the things I've learned in my sales practice years and years ago. It was called a man named Zig Ziglar. He said, if you know and confidence replaces fear.
That's fact.
So what happens is that everyone will be able to work within that world of confidence. Right now, we're not working within that world. And if you trap an animal, any animal, I don't care from the butterfly to the lion, you trap an animal, they're going to come out fighting, and that's what we're experiencing now. So I think all we need to do is really go back and educate ourselves as educators to a story that we may not be privy to, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
That's fact.
We have to, when you go and do an annotated bibliography, you have to look at multiple sources,
Indeed.
And every once in a while, you're going to come across something that you didn't know before. And you're like, okay, well, let me click this. So
Ron, I hate to
keep on clicking. No, I'm saying keep on clicking. I'm done.
Yes, sir. Thank you, brother. So on that note, that's a great segue. As teachers, we have to, as you said, as educators, educate ourselves and then share with our students. But we also have to be advocates to the stakeholders and the powers that be to change policies, to have more culturally relevant pedagogy, etc. So here at E4E, we now have an action live here to make sure our Secretary of Education centers teacher priorities. So this is an action and petition that we have live, where we are calling on the new Secretary of Education, Dr. Miguel Cardona, to ask him to give teachers a seat at the table, right? Starting with meeting with some of you at E4E as leaders, teacher leaders. So if you want to add on to this, please sign on to this particular action. I put the link there in the chat. And once again, we're at 6:01. Thank you so much for joining us. Be on the lookout for the next section of our Closing the Gaps in Education Discourse series. Thank you for joining us, for adding your thoughts and your attention. And yes, enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much. Thank Brother Sharif as well, Sharif ANAEL-BEY, for delivering this powerful presentation for us and our educators. All right, everyone, good night.
Good night. Thank you, brother, again.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much again.
And we will be cajoling Sharif to see if we can get access to that PowerPoint. Stay tuned. I'll be in touch.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Take care.
Night.
See the chat, brother? You muted.
Yeah, chat. Yeah, that's crazy, bro. Yeah, this is dope. This is dope. Again, I appreciate it. Hun, it went amazing. You hear me, baby? Yeah. Yeah, it went amazing. Yeah, this is dope. What did you think? What were some of the facial expressions you got?
Yeah, people will process it, man. People, this is a first, like he said, there has not been a narrative. You made Granny's quilt tonight.
Right.
You know, Granny's take all these cuts from fabrics and weave together this quilt. And I think that's what people experienced tonight by some of the things that the comments were made.
Yes, sir.
So yeah, thank you once again, brother. And
well, I appreciate it, man. I can't wait to see what they do with Rev.
Okay, yeah. So are you gonna make this available? The
I'm just gonna do it right now.
All right, please do it. And in my follow-up email, I'll share that out. And I'll also have the recording as well.
Yes, sir.